Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Unofficial Game Pass podcast. It's episode 11, and this week we are looking at Outriders by Square Enix. I think probably the only real sort of AAA title of note that's come out this year, or at least that has had a large level of notoriety, I want to say, or at least people have been anticipating. It's kind of been it's been a dull start to the year for games, really, but I don't think really that's much of a surprise considering most big titles come out around the end of August, November, whatnot. But with that being said, it's come to Game Pass. Whether that's obviously a good thing. Any game that comes to Game Pass is good, but whether it's good for my time and the way I have to play it, we'll get into that. I don't know exactly where to start with this, because usually in a game like this, or usually in an episode like this, you might start with story and kind of talk a little bit about what you enjoyed. But like this game is kind of doesn't follow the sort of the linear path that a lot of the other titles we've talked about before do. That it being a very open world looter shooter style game, kind of a la Destiny, other games in that sort of medium as well. I suppose, Conor, I'll throw the question over to you. I think neither of us have particularly played a large amount of this game. I think I don't want to speak for you, but for me it was very much my lack of enjoyment of it that made me not want to play it. But for you, was it more a case of time, or did you just not find yourself enjoying it as well?
I see, when I came to this game, I knew that it wasn't really going to be my thing, and it already had an uphill struggle for me, because I mean, you're right, it's occupying like a space that is unfilled. There's not many other games coming out right now, so at the moment it is like the big shooter to play with your friends before like Resident Evil comes out, or something big that everyone's going to flock to. And it's developed by, I think, People Can Fly, who did Gears of War Judgment, which, it's a Gears of War game that I enjoyed, but it was around about then that I was feeling a bit fatigued with the series, and then I sort of dropped off of Xbox for a while, and then only recently I came back to Gears. But so it's got kind of elements of Gears in that it's it's got like that cover system, very similar to Gears. And then the other game that I've played, which it's similar to, is like Borderlands, that kind of shooting, looting co-op thing. I haven't actually played Destiny because I looked at it as decided there's nothing in there that really interests me or grabs me. So, but this game had like a steep hill to climb for me, because I would be fatigued to and not interested in a new Borderlands or a Gears game. Like, I haven't even completed Gears 5 because I just wasn't interested in it. So playing something where it's like a Gears, Borderlands, Destiny is just like, well, I can tell it's not really going to be my thing, and it's not even something I'm familiar with. So it took me a while to get around to it, just because I completed Yakuza 0. That's what I've been doing. Which we talked about weeks ago. I've 55 hours on the story. Finally done it. Yeah, good game. But yeah, so I was a bit late coming around to Outriders, and it poses that problem, is like when you're introducing a new franchise, how do you break away from like that just a generic sci-fi narrative? And like, I started this game and I was willing to get into it, and then very early on, it's like the voice acting just rubbed me the wrong way. I think maybe a mix of the voice acting and the writing, and then I was like, oh, this is making me wince a bit. So I started to skip the cutscenes. But from what I can tell, it's like a very, I mean, someone said it was like a Sci-Fi Channel program. Where it was just like, very kind of low budget sci-fi thing. It does kind of feel like that. It's like, all the things that make Halo or Gears of War kind of give it its own flavor. This is just kind of, I feel bad saying this, because they've obviously put effort into the premise and the story and the writing, and there's there are a lot of cutscenes. Like even when I was like, because I skipped through them because I just I didn't care really after a while. But there was just nothing there that really grabbed me. I mean, the premise that Earth is dead, they've got to find a new planet to colonize on. They come to this planet, it's humanity's last hope, and then there's like a storm that alters people and gives them abilities, and then there's like I don't know, a ravaged planet. I didn't really pay that much attention, to be honest, but that is the premise. And very early on, it's just like, this isn't doing it for me. But once I got into the game, it's like I like the graphics. It's quite a pretty looking game. I mean, not if you look too closely, but when you're generally looking around, I mean, it's quite pretty. It runs mostly smoothly. I mean, I had a few bugs here and there. I didn't play it at launch, so I'm probably playing a little bit of a patched up version of the game. I think the gameplay is okay, but the reason I didn't play it that much is just because I like solo player experiences that are heavily story focused, and while this may have a story, it had nothing in that story which grabbed me. So I mean, that's why I didn't delve into it properly.
Yeah, no, I definitely resonate with a lot of that, to be honest, because at least when you look at something like Gears of War, and I don't want to kind of compare this a lot to Gears of War, but it's kind of hard not to draw the comparison with, because as Halo is to most first person shooters, Gears of War really is sort of the base plate for like any sort of third person cover based shooter. And like, at least with Gears, it's sure the story can be a bit, theatrical at times. I think there's no denying that, but at least it's got like this contained story in a linear standpoint, and you played for a couple of hours, and then if you're not a big fan of the universe, you've got something out of it, you've had a fun experience, and you kind of go on with your time. But I think maybe it's a more overarching question for this genre in general, of this sort of like grind looter shooter sort of pump hours and hours and hours into something. Like, I get that it really gets an itch for some people, and I think maybe if we were to have the argument of, okay, well, you have to buy this game, a lot of people would be a lot more what's the word I'm looking for? A lot more sort of open to the idea of playing it, and maybe a little bit less aggravated or annoyed by it, because if you're buying a game like this, Outriders will certainly give you hours upon hours on hours of action that you can keep playing for months. Granted, I think the formula is really repetitive, and I really don't like how long it takes to really get into these sorts of things, so I kind of lose interest in these sorts of genres very quickly. So I think if you were talking about it from a paid perspective, you'd probably be like, okay, well, I can look past some of the faults of it in sort of an idea of a greater longevity for this sort of title. But the fact that it's free on Game Pass probably would throw me off it to no end, because I wouldn't want to waste time on this game that I could be playing, some of the myriad of other class titles there are on Game Pass. I think you bring up the Gears of War comparison, which is fair. I think a lot of people have drawn the comparison to this game being sort of a mix between Gears of War and Mass Effect Andromeda. As someone who's played both of those, I think that's a fair comparison. I think the Mass Effect Andromeda one is, well, at least from a story perspective, is kind of similar in the fact that this human colony goes off into deep space, into a different universe, to try and find something to live on. I think the only real reason I kind of thought it was similar to Andromeda was, first of all, some of the art assets look similar to it. That's by no means saying that they copied it. I mean, Andromeda doesn't exactly have this huge, diverse level of, it's kind of just science fiction and space thing that, the generic sort of stuff you'd see in that sort of element of gameplay or that genre. But the one thing that kind of made it feel like Andromeda to me was, like you mentioned, the game looks great, but character models look atrocious in this game. I can't stand looking at any of them. I think they just look so lifeless, and I don't know what it is about these sort of, I don't know what it is about next gen games, or at least games now that come out. It just feels like that there's just a lack of polish to some of them. especially these sorts of genres as well, where it just looks like models aren't finished. Like it actually feels like someone has left out like a crucial part in the rendering process. And I want to say first of all, I know it's extremely difficult in the games industry to create hair on characters. I know that's a really difficult like at least artistic and development standpoint to go through, because you have to kind of literally do each strand of hair for a character and give it its own physics and whatnot. But oh my god, does the hair in this game look terrible. Like it's so bad. Like I haven't like that's the one thing I caught up on, because it looks like jelly. Like it just looks so poor. Like I don't know, like if it's because they were in crunch time or whatever, and by no means is this ever usually the problem of the developers. It's usually the problem of the publishers if something doesn't look finished because they've had to rush it out. But oh god, it rings so clear to like games that, like, if there's one thing I can't stand in games, I don't care if the game doesn't look like really high definition. If it doesn't look realistic, like some of my favorite games are old low poly games, or even some of the games that come out now that try and replicate that PS1 PS2 style game. But the one thing I cannot stand is going into a cutscene or going into a new area and then assets just popping up on your screen because they haven't had enough time to render in. That annoys me to no end, because it rips you right out of the game. And it's just like, even, let's take an example. One of the key criticisms of the Halo Infinite demo was that you could see particles of smoke or particles of grass popping up as you walked around. That is the worst thing ever. I could excuse it in something like Minecraft, but like I cannot for the life of me think about a AAA game that's coming out now that doesn't deal with the same scope or scale as something like Minecraft, but cannot render these models, especially on a new next gen console. Like if you think about it in this way, like I would expect maybe titles near the end of a console generation to maybe have this problem, and I could excuse it then because they're really pushing the console to its limits. But at the beginning of a generation, these games are optimized for Xbox One, PlayStation 4. And even if you want to make the argument like, oh, well, they're optimized for next-gen consoles, at most they're optimized for PlayStation 5, because that is the weaker of the two consoles. So the Series X should have no problem with running this. But it's just... I don't know. This sort of stuff just always annoys me. Sorry, I am going off a bit around, but I think it is something to just take in for a second, because it's something I notice a lot more with these AAA games now. And it's just, maybe it's sort of the Simpsons meme, old man yells at cloud sort of thing coming out in me now. But it just, I don't know. If you had similar problems with this, I don't know. What did you think?
To be honest, I haven't really noticed, and maybe it's because I cared so little that I was just skipping the cutscenes, so I didn't really get to see much of the animations or the renders. I will say that I had weird moments where enemies would they'd be floating as if they were on a level above me, like an invisible platform. Like that happened a strange amount. I can't say that it really showed any real problems, but as I say, maybe I'm playing a better version of the game than you, a more stable version of the game than you were. It's hard, isn't it? I think as games kind of get more expansive, Cyberpunk tried to do that thing where they had like a huge city rendering and loading extremely quickly, if you're playing on a next-gen console or a high-end PC. Mm-hmm. If you're playing on the last-gen platforms, it just failed to render completely. But I have to wonder if games are trying to get kind of that vast breadth of area, are they going to start kind of toning down facial features and the finer details in order to accommodate kind of everything they're doing on screen? It did start to feel artificial when, you're walking towards an area and, it's just standard in Outriders. Like you walk towards the new combat area and all the enemies will just kind of pop in behind the cover and like kind of appear. And it does just kind of break the immersion. And when you're fighting enemies that are so, literally just repeated, I did find it a bit grinding. I completely get what you're saying about like it feeling like a chore. I think because I do have little time to play, at least, how I view my time as when I'm doing university work and stuff. I sit down and I want to feel like I progress at something, and so I play a game and I do a few levels. When I play a game like this and I sit down for half an hour, and I feel like I'm just chipping away at like this very vast grind experience. It's like, there's not going to be much reward for me unless I dedicate many days. And I think that it probably hindered my experience that I didn't play with because when I was playing this game, it's just, I could imagine playing with, say, in high school, if I had my like group of high school friends, as we did back in the day, we'd like all play the same game. Like, I could imagine this game being a blast, but I mean, without kind of, those days being in the past, and without that kind of core group of friends that you can always hop on and play with, it's just sort of I don't know. I mean, I've never really been into like MMOs or any sort of game with a grind. It always just seems so like mind numbing to me.
Yeah. I wonder, is it even the case, like, because when it comes to these sort of games, obviously multiplayer is at the forefront for them, but they always tend to just tack on a single player option for those who maybe want to play it single player. I know Fallout 76 is a good example of this, because it was very much built up as this, well, you can go online and you can talk to everyone, but sure, the people who play like Fallout don't care about online stuff like half the time. So like most of them just want to go through the single player story. So obviously that led to them releasing it with a single player narrative as well. But like, is it better to just not include a single player element at all and focus solely on the multiplayer aspect than it is to say, like, and this is obviously with the benefit of hindsight, release an extremely unpolished game with poor server issues, which sort of has which I think, all in fairness, has decent levels of multiplayer longevity, but as I mentioned earlier, like, such a chore to play through on single player. Like, could their efforts not be put into better else? And then even if it just feels like when you go into multiplayer scenarios, I don't know if there is a case where the enemies are adjusted for the level of players that are involved in each scenario. But like, when you're playing on single player, it just feels like you're playing against the amount of enemies that are meant to be dealt with by 3 people. And it just, I don't know, it kind of puts me off it, to be honest, because that sort of, it doesn't turn it really into much of a challenge as it does, again, a chore. Because I don't think, like, if it was a challenge, I would be talking about something where you have like Doom Eternal, which has comprehensive AI, different demons in which you combat with different weapons and whatnot. But Outriders is very much just a bullet sponge game, like, for online multiplayer. Like, the AI are incredibly stupid. There's no like complexity about them whatsoever. Even the bosses are just, I suppose, they're just tankier enemies that take more bullets to take down. They don't have any sort of intelligence to them at all. Like, I think the first boss fight you encounter with that altar at the top of the tower is very much just you going into cover, shooting him with a load of bullets, maybe using your abilities or whatnot, and then shooting him again if you're playing on single player. And I'm sure there's some pro Outriders player out there that like is going to tell me, well, no, you're doing it wrong, you have to do it like this, that, and the other. But for somebody starting out, like, it's just an extremely tedious task. And like, I get that obviously in a game that's designed to be sort of a grindy system, they can't spend too much time on this, but it doesn't pain to, recreate enemies that, or at least AI that have been established as pretty much fundamentally better than others, like, years ago, to try and implement them into something like this. Like, take Halo as an example, Doom is another one. Like, there's just different elements. Like, every guy you come up against in Outriders is just a guy with a gun, and he happens to have more health than the other guy with a gun. Like, it's just extremely dull, boring, and has this awful sense of like Call of Duty-esque gameplay when it comes to combat scenarios. I can excuse Call of Duty's campaigns for a certain element because, well, first of all, I don't think that's the main reason people are going to those games to begin with. And if they are, I mean, some of the classics like World at War have good elements of combat. They got good verticality, and even Modern Warfare 2, I think, was quite renowned for having good level of verticality multiplayer-wise. But like, when Call of Duty has always had this sense of, you walk into a shooting gallery, you kill a load of people, you go into sort of a quiet section or a cutscene, then you go into another shooting gallery and vice versa. And it does that in this as well. And the problem with this is, and I don't know if this is a sort of a problem with these sort of types of games, and I mean that in sort of third-person cover-based shooters, there's no jump, so it doesn't feel like there's any verticality in these titles at all. Like my mind goes to like when The Last of Us 2 announced there was going to be a jump button, as if this was some like revolutionary, like they had finally found a use for, I think it's the X button on PlayStation. Yeah, the X button on PlayStation. Like, it just seems so ridiculous. Like every room you go into is just a flat surface with maybe an elevated area that you have to run up a ramp to get to. There's no like, oh, I think I might jump up to here, or I might be able to get onto this vantage point. It's all just, okay, there's enemies in front of me. They will never be behind me unless I run past them. So you could just literally sit at the back of your spawn, take a couple of pot shots at people and then move up. And that, I suppose that has to appeal to someone. But like, I don't mean this in a bad way, but like, who is enjoying this? I haven't bumped into anyone that's like, okay, I'm gonna go spend 60 quid on a game to sit behind cover and shoot at the same enemies for hours on top of hours on top of hours. Like, there's no like, and this is on the same point as well. Like, yeah, I think there's some good elements to this game. I really like the combat depth, especially with regards to the different classes. I think there's good stuff there. There's good verticality there. Like, the abilities are fun to use. They are. But like, just to get to that area, is to get to that point in the game where you're enjoying it. It's such a trek. And to the point, like, you're just turning off players that want to get involved in this series, or not in this series, but in this game. Like, and it's just, I don't know, maybe I'm looking at this from a complete different perspective, because I don't enjoy this genre in general. So this is probably going to become from a biased perspective. Like, I don't even really enjoy Destiny. I never got into Destiny. As much as I love Bungie, as much as I sort of like that sort of first person shooter mechanics that they employ, I just never got into it. I could never sit down and go to different raid events or whatnot. That's never been my sort of cup of tea. I like something that's there constantly that I can go back to and do whenever I want to. Whereas these time sort of stuff and going to different missions and whatnot, like, it's fine, but I like to be able to pick up a game, play it, and then when I come back to it, not feel like I've missed out on a load of stuff that other people who have just been grinding the game for more hours have managed to get. It's just, I'm trying to figure out what I want to say here. Like, I have my pros and cons list beside me here, and I think I have about 10 things on the cons list and 2 on the pros. And like, the 2 on the pros are that I like the depth of combat, which I've already mentioned. I think that's the strongest point of the game, to be honest. And the other pro was I like the world tier system. I think that's a good level indicator for how difficult you want the game to be. And it's not even how difficult you want the game to be, it's how beefy the targets you're going to be bullet sponging into are going to be. There's no, like, it's not like, I don't, at least to my knowledge, obviously I haven't looked at the code or anything of this game. I don't think upping the world tier changes the enemy's behavior at all. I think it just means that there's either more or there's just beefier tanks that you have to shoot into, which is just a really lazy way of doing difficulty. I've never enjoyed that. And in fairness, this has come from someone that has played like sort of more older games that have had really cheesy stuff for like Halo 2 is a great example of like ridiculous difficulty that really isn't fair to the player, and I've kind of enjoyed that in a sense because I feel like it's a historic landmark for that. But at least with all the progress we've made in games, you know, this shouldn't be the bare minimum. It feels almost cheap to charge someone for this. Like, it just feels like they've done the bare minimum for it. And like, I hate to say this, like, because obviously I don't think there's malicious intent on the part of any developer when they're releasing a game. And I feel like, yes, there's obviously people are being brought to this, and maybe I'm being really like snobby or upright about it, but I just feel like people should expect more from a game now, to be honest, than sort of this basic repetitive combat loop of just shoot at enemies. And it's not even an intelligent combat loop, it's just a mindless like boggle fest. Like, if I wanted to shut my brain off, maybe I would look at this, and even at that I would find it just incredibly dull. Like, again I'm kind of going on sort of, I don't mean to go on a rant about it. I like, again, I think that developers, for the most part, have the audience in mind, and I think there's definitely people out there who enjoy this. And I obviously can't tell you what to enjoy and what not to enjoy. It's just something particularly that I can't wrap my brain around as to why people would want to pump so many hours into this game. And Destiny's the same as well. I think at least Destiny has some element of lore to it now, but just Destiny has always been something that's always irked me as well, because it's like there's just so little coming out of this. It's like, oh, you're going off to get this new sword or this new gun or whatever. It's just like, I don't know. I personally can't justify pumping 20 plus hours of gameplay into finding one rare item. But I suppose with that, I have a few other points that I'll get onto, but I'll hand it back over to you if you want to maybe say a few words, because I understand I'm taking up the floor.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that you raise. I think that how often would you grab a friend that you play with and say, let's go play the Halo campaign? And I think that most people would probably say, well, I've played the Halo campaign, so there's no need to go back to it. And maybe it's just that promise with these grind type games is that there's always something new to do, or there's always that next thing. And so it's a fun way to play with your friends where there is always progression, where it's not like something you get done with very quickly. And maybe there's a space for that. I think it shows that they're very anxious not to call this game a games as service game, because Square Enix obviously previously brought out the Marvel's Avengers game, which I think got quite heavily criticized in being quite a shallow experience and not at all very, very polished. That said, people enjoy it, because it's Avengers. So it's a very difficult thing to bring Outriders, which completely new IP, into a market where people kind of buy and play what's already familiar. And if this podcast does one thing, I feel it should answer the question of what does a new premise or a new IP need to do to set up something successful or something that grabs the player. But before we go down that road, I do want to say that I think the gameplay itself, I think there's some merit to be given there, at least from me. I know you've been very critical, so I'm going to say what I think. I think that when I've played kind of previously on kind of these grind type game, MMO type games, is that they're very hard for me to allow myself to enjoy. And the thing that's nice with Outriders, firstly, I can't stand first person shooters where looting is like a big thing. I couldn't stand Cyberpunk because it's like I don't want to have to enjoy kind of a minute of shooting enemies out of a room and then maybe 3 minutes afterwards going around kind of looking at things, picking them up. I mean, it's just not enjoyable for me to go around picking things up. So it feels very intuitive in Outriders, where you see an item on the floor and you walk over it and press a button. I love that. And for the most part, I think that the systems in which you change your gear or customize are very intuitive. I do have a problem with the UI that Cyberpunk had as well, is that it seemed to be made for a mouse or a cursor. So when you're playing on an Xbox, you have to control the cursor with the thumbstick. And it's, Cyberpunk made this more intuitive because on the D-pad you could click the up and down and it would automatically go to the next selection box. Whereas Outriders, you have to actually drag the thumbstick around to where you want to go. And I sold loads of things at a vendor earlier, and I was amazed at how long that took, because you have to hover over it, wait for the box to come up, press the right thumbstick just to mark it, and you go through doing that, marking all the things I need to set. I was like, it needs to be a faster and more intuitive AI on the Xbox. It's probably far better on PC because it seems to be made for a mouse. That said, I think going into the menus with your skill tree and all the gear, like all of it felt very intuitive to me. You have the little gold thing for anything that pops up that is new. It's very easy to look at your stuff and find out, what's better. And, I thought that probably this is one of the most accessible, what does this genre have as a name? I keep saying grind type games, but it's one of the most accessible, like one of these games that I've played, and that it almost feels like a Gears of War, in that it's so intuitive that I can like go from area to area, constantly getting new gear, and it doesn't feel like I have to read up on what I'm doing. So I like that, and I appreciate that, and I admire and respect that. The gunplay itself, obviously you said that the enemies are bullet sponges, which they are. They're just complete bullet sponges, because that's what these kind of games do. Cyberpunk, when an enemy is a certain level and your gun does a certain amount of damage, and it's just you plugging that enemy with your attacks until their health bar's down. So the way that you play, it's usually dodging around. I think very quickly once you get your abilities, I mean, I never used cover at all. Like, that cover system becomes completely obsolete, because the way to succeed is you go in, you use all your abilities, and the more you use your abilities, the more you get health back. Or at least it was for my. I played Pyromancer because I knew that I would be playing on mostly by my own, and I wanted to deal as much damage as fast as possible. So, it has that thing from Doom where it forces you to do glory kills to get health back. It forces you to use your abilities or get guns that give you health as you shoot. But unfortunately, unlike Doom, there just there isn't the variation in the enemy types, right? So you're saying, like, when you change the world tier system, which I think is a great system. Like, you put the world tier up and you get XP, you get a new world tier, and that's like the difficulty. So it goes to like world tier 15, and you keep raising it, and the higher you get it, the better loot you get. So it's like an incentive to always play the hardest version of the game possible. Except that because the enemy types are so kind of mind-numbingly repetitive, you have like the ones that charge at you, the ones that will stay behind cover and shoot, and then the kind of tanky boss ones which will use their abilities, and you need to use your abilities to interrupt them. And most of the time I found the game most engaging when I wasn't fighting human enemies, like when the few monsters popped up, just because I find it really, really taxing just to fight a faceless kind of horde of the same humanoid enemy. It's like terrible. Don't like it. There's that thing in like Gears of War 4 where you fought robots for like a large amount of time, and you almost cheer when the locusts come back. It's like, oh, finally. But yeah, so it suffers from interesting enemies, and as you said, kind of the world tier, as you put it up, it just feels like either the enemies have more health or they're doing more damage, and it's kind of superficial in a way. That said, every time I got a new gun, I was excited to see what it did. I was excited to see how many rounds it had, kind of what effects it did, and every time you get something new that's really good, you hop into combat and you're like mowing down enemies, and that feels like fantastic. I understand why people get addicted to that grind, because every time you get rewarded a little something, there's that kind of moment where you feel really powerful, and then you quickly kind of get kind of punted back by the harder enemies, and you need another loot again. So I think it has an entertaining gunplay loop. The enemies kind of burst with gore when you shoot them. It's quite satisfying. The guns when you do get a gun that works with your build, and it's all entertaining and satisfying and it's intuitive. But I think really for me, where the game comes down is like, I don't care about any of it. Like, that all works. I wish it worked with a good story or characters I cared about, or a scenario or premise I found interesting, but this just wasn't it.
Yeah, no. Again, it kind of touches on a lot of the problems that I have with it as well. I think, see, there's definitely, like, there's a good, by no means do I hate everything about this game. Just want to put that out there. I think it has some good mechanics. I like, as I mentioned earlier, I do like the level of depth in the combat system. I'm not a big fan of the weapons. I've never been a fan of this sort of tiered level of weaponry in a game, because I kind of like to go into a game and know the damage a weapon does, know whether to pick it up or not. And that's just a preference for me. I understand that. I know that the genre in particular is very much centered around this sort of tiered weapon system, and I should know that going into it. So by no means by saying that that's the developer's fault for doing that. It's just not for me. So that's going to inform my opinion on it to some degree. I think I have to bring up the thing that everyone has been talking about. It was very much, even in the demo, for like, it was all that anyone was talking about on Twitter was the cutscenes, the unnecessary cutscenes of you putting down a flag for 2 seconds and then fading to black, or you opening a door for like 2 seconds and fading to black. It's so unnecessary. And again, I want to stress this. Okay, I don't know any of the stuff behind the engine or the graphical elements they've been doing, but just from an eyes perspective of when I was looking at it, and again, this is extremely naive of me to maybe go in with this assumption, but like, looking at the game, I don't think it's particularly taxing to look at, or particularly taxing to a next-gen console. Like, I just don't see why that can't transition into a new area fairly quickly. Like, I don't know why there needs to be this unnecessary cutscene. And I don't know whether that was an artistic choice or whether it's to mask the loading screens. I feel like it's definitely to mask it. I don't know if anyone in their right mind would put that in as a choice and not think it's annoying. And if they did put it in, well, I don't think it was properly play tested enough to realize that. I don't know. There just seems like so many things in this game that they really just, I don't know, that in particular, I feel like they just didn't look into how that would look. Like, it feels like a first draft of a game, and they haven't gone back and fixed the stuff that doesn't work. Like, this feels like, to me, like if I was to submit an assignment, and then that ended up being, like, maybe I submitted a first draft of a final dissertation, and then that ended up being the final thing. Well, that would never happen. Your tutor or whoever would send it back to you and be like, this could do it more work, this is wrong, change it. And I feel like again, this is like, I wasn't in the room, I can't say what happened, but to me personally, as a consumer playing this game, it feels like it hasn't gone through that rigorous testing. And that's by no means to give out about QA or whatnot. I think they do a stellar job in literally any field or game they're in. And again, the devs, it can't be their fault either. I just feel like, again, it's probably down to time crunch or what they had to do. I have one other minor pet peeve, and that is when you go into cutscenes, the camera shake is ridiculous, and like, it makes me want to throw up every time I watch a cutscene, because it's this handheld sort of style, like, video, which, first of all, I want to notice, even from an artistic standpoint, and I don't mean to be poncy about this, but like, handheld camera is meant to replicate somebody holding a camera. Like, it's meant to give you that idea that someone is recording this at the time, and that style for cutscenes is fine if there aren't any cuts. For some reason, there's still cuts in this game, so I don't know if there's multiple people who just have really poor, like, arthritis in their hands that are taking this video, or like, they've just decided that they just haven't understood what this sort of format was for. Maybe some guy saw it and he was just like, in production, he was like, oh yeah, I like that style for this cutscene, let's put it in everything. And I hate it so much. Like, it makes watching, like, I don't know if it's just me, like, whenever I'm watching something, and if it's like doing this constant shaking, like, it's like if you watch what's a good example of a movie that does this really poorly? Oh yeah, Taken 3 is a good example. Very few people have seen it, because I don't know anyone who's gotten past Taken 1 and watched the second one. So this is probably a ridiculous sort of statement and go completely off track, but it will make sense, I promise. Taken 3 is famous for a particular fight scene between Liam Neeson and I think some other individual, I can't remember the name of them, but I think at the time Liam Neeson is a fair age now, in fairness, and of course there's nothing wrong with that. But he clearly doesn't have the sort of the physical ability to be in like really high octane action fight scenes anymore. So what they did was, there's an absurd amount of cuts to make it look like he's fighting very quickly, and it's really obnoxious up close, like shaking camera stuff, and everyone gave out about it because it just makes you feel sick looking at it, because it's just going so quickly and so fast. And yes, granted, Outriders cutscenes aren't this like fast bombastic sort of stuff that goes on. A lot of the time it's just people talking, but this shaking thing constantly makes me feel like I'm on a sailboat in the middle of the ocean, and it makes me want to throw up. Like I feel like that's a very personal like problem to have with it. I'd say there's definitely people out there who have a problem with this as well, because obviously not everyone is going to be so displaced by this camera sort of choice. But like, when you're talking about making a game accessible to people, I think that's like, don't make it so that people don't want to watch your cutscenes. Like that, I think that's a core point 101. And again, I feel like that's something that if it went to a review stage, would have been called out straight away if it had been looked at, properly. Like, and on the off chance that there's someone who worked on this game listening to the podcast, which I don't think there will be, but just on the chance that someone is listening to it, know that I dislike a lot of this stuff, but know that I also understand that this probably isn't your fault. Like, I imagine, like, again, this game I think was majority finished up during COVID, so like, I'm not expecting this to be a 100% like perfect game. I'm just saying, like, there's some small bits in it that really, like, I feel like someone in the office, or someone at least in the, I don't know, the Slack group, I don't know what devs use for like communicating, but like something that like someone would have mentioned and thought like, maybe we should tone this down, or maybe we should look into this a bit more, because it just feels like that it hasn't been given that proper scrutiny. It's just a lot of small things that build up into one big sort of element that really just, well, for lack of a better term, grind my gears. But like, yeah, no, I again, it's a bit nitpicky, but I feel like there is someone out there that will sort of resonate with that comment a little bit, hopefully. So I mean, again, I want to mention something positive about it at least. Let me think. No, I'm sure if you're into this genre, okay, I'm going to try and be a little bit I'm going to step back from my own opinion for a second, because I feel like I've given a lot of that. And if you're someone that's into this sort of genre, particularly this looter shooter MMO style game, I think you will, as you mentioned, Connor, you'll get some level of enjoyment out of this if you have a group of friends that you're willing to play it with. And I think the good thing about it being on Game Pass is that it's readily available to so many people. So not everyone needs to go out and pay 60 quid for a game that they may or may not play for more than a day. So I think, yeah, it'll certainly scratch it. And maybe if you're a big fan of Destiny and you're looking for something to change it up, like, first of all, I want to mention the pause screen and the navigation of the home screen is literally, I don't know how they got that through legal, because that is literally a 1-for-1 replica of what Destiny 2's one looks like. I can't get over the navigation of weapons and whatnot in that game, how they managed to coin that off as being sort of their own original property. But if it's something you'd be interested in, like, there's some fun there. The elemental abilities, the different classes, they're all class, they're all amazing, and you can tell that that's what the sort of the pitch of the game was, to have this sort of open world online game with quests and everything similar to Destiny, but with this particular niche, this third person combat shooter with these abilities. And that sounds class in theory, but I just feel like the execution of it is just the bare minimum. Like, there could be so much more in so many elements of this game that really just doesn't live up to the, not the hype, because I don't think this game was particularly hyped. Maybe it was by some people. I at least in my sort of circles, I didn't really hear too many people talking about it. I feel like this game wouldn't have gotten as much attention as it did if there were more titles coming out at the same time. It just seems to be the only big developer game that seems to be coming out now. And I think, in fairness, that has been lucky for them in some senses, but also I think it's probably bad for them in some senses, because it meant there's a whole new level of scrutiny put on them that maybe people wouldn't have noticed if they were preoccupied with some other game. but I suppose to end on sort of maybe a positive note, or maybe, you know, a hopeful note, I think if anything, the problems they've had, I think that they've fixed up the server issues a little bit more than what was at launch, which is good. So it means that they are actively participating with the community that they want to really latch on to. It seems like Square Enix, as you mentioned, they did Avengers before, and they're definitely aiming down that sort of similar style of gameplay market. It's not something I'm particularly interested in, but there's definitely an audience there for that. And, you know, who knows, in the future, maybe they'll fix up a few of the bits and pieces, maybe a few of the character models, hopefully. Maybe they'll make some small minor tweaks that might make the game a bit more playable. And I mean, yeah, who knows? This could be a game that we look at in maybe a year or two time and is nominated for some award for best developed game or whatnot, similar to, say, Destiny or No Man's Sky or something. Like, I mean, I feel like it's destined for that category if it just stays on that long. But yeah, I suppose that's kind of my closing thoughts on it. Anyways, Connor, if you have anything else to say about it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I want to go back to what you were saying about the unnecessary cutscenes, because for the most part, I know that I very quickly decided I wasn't interested in them. I understood that the fun I was having was in purely the gameplay, not the story or anything like that. And I've heard a lot of people talk about this game, and that may be the case for a lot of people. And, you know, if that is the case, I feel bad for them to have put so much effort into a story and the cutscenes and the writing and the voice. Well, I don't know if there's much effort been put into the voice acting, but that didn't mean to be so sarky. But the point is that, you know where your strengths are when you're playing a game. You know, if something isn't working, or, you know, find out a way to make it work, or cut it and focus on the fun parts, which, you know, in this game will be the gameplay, will be the co-op stuff, and the interplay between the different classes and the abilities and things. I can't personally speak for the interplay between classes, just because I didn't manage to find like a multiplayer game. Well, I mean, I had my game open, and, you know, I was focused on getting through the areas as I was progressing, so I didn't want to join some random game. The unnecessary cutscenes I actually didn't experience, maybe only once. So, like, maybe you could enlighten me, because, like, there were many moments where, like, I was putting down a flag or opening a door, but they didn't feel intrusive in any way. Whereas there was one very clear time when I was at, like, a hub area, and I opened a door, and it, like, played a cutscene of open the door. Then it faded black, went to a loading screen, then went to the game, and it was like, oh, I've literally just gone through this door, like, I haven't gone anywhere. Like, that was the only time where it felt like, oh, there's an unnecessary cutscene. But did you do, like, all the main? Because I've only done the main missions. I didn't really go for any of the side quests. Were, like, the intrusive loading screens, like, all along there as well?
Yeah, so I particularly found them to be most prevalent in... So, I suppose the best way I can describe it is in the first mission where you're put out into the world by... God, the characters' names are escaping me now again, but again, I just didn't really engage too much with it past that sort of baseline element. But when you're put out, first of all, to go on a mission to, you know, beat the first sort of boss or whatever, there's a certain side quest you can go to on the side, which is for you to hunt down, I think it's some militia leader or whatever that's killed some other person's squad. And, like, the one thing it's intrusive in the sense that I feel like you see it coming up and you're like, oh, this is just going to be annoying me. But I think it's unnecessary is the word I really want to use for it, because it's like, for that mission, let's say for that side quest, you have to go through a door into a bunker to then go onto a small little area in which you fight a couple of enemies and then get to the final boss battle. But then you're thinking to yourself, like, this area is so small, like, how is it difficult for it to be rendered quickly? Especially in a game that looks like Outriders does. And it just feels like, why is this cutscene here? Like, it just annoys me. Like, I can imagine, like, I certainly haven't played a large amount of this game in terms of hours wise, but I can imagine if you're playing 30 to 40 hours and you're seeing this over and over again, maybe you might get used to it, but I would just find it so repetitive and annoying to keep having to see that over and over again. That would be my sort of problem with it, really.
Yeah. I mean, are you talking about like when you hold X on something and it literally just does the action, or are you talking about like it literally fades to black and goes to a loading screen?
It fades to black, goes to a sort of mini 2-second, 3-second cutscene, and then fades to black again, and then you're into it.
Right, yeah. I don't know, because like every time a cutscene came up, I skipped it. So I don't know, like if I've missed those or if I just didn't notice that badly. But I mean, I really want to say, like, it really matters when you're making a game like this, like especially how you start it, because first impressions are everything. Like, I remember not really caring for the first Borderlands, but the second Borderlands, it opened with such like an awesome cinematic that introduced the characters that I was willing to watch like all the stuff pertaining to the story. And this game kind of opens quite like, it's like a non-event really. It opens and you just like, go talk to this person, go talk to this person, and it's just like, oh, I'm kind of bored and I'm not even got into any gameplay. You know, you need to establish characters that you can care about, you know, for any sci-fi thing, not just like an established thing, but, you know, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, you very quickly get introduced to your little droid, you know, BD-1, and, you know, that relationship is one that you want to watch and develop, and you care about that little droid, and, you know, as always in Star Wars, it is the droids or the creatures that you care about the most. In Outriders, it's like, well, what do I care about? Because I there's no one. I mean, it's not like I gave it much of a chance, but it just didn't grab me. Like, you know, I saw a spaceship, I got the premise, and then it was at no point was there introduced like something for me to personally care about. Like, yeah, you can have a neat world and a neat premise, and I've heard people praise some of the kind of notes that you pick up and read, and you can have neat lore and everything, but let's face it, like, story should come into the gameplay as well. Like, when you're playing Halo, it's not just hordes of the Covenant or like hordes of an enemy. There is story weaved in. There are Marines that you interact with. You've got Cortana in your head, and games should find a way to weave narrative into combat scenarios. I think Outriders does a good job, by the way, of encouraging some tactical play in its combat arenas. I think that I've heard a few people talk like that they've had to switch up their tactics, change their abilities or their armor, and actually play the game differently to get past a certain boss or wave of enemies, or, you know, can you use the environment to bottleneck the enemies or whatever. So I think that they have tried to create areas for tactical gameplay, but as you said, I think it largely becomes a case of running into the enemies and then running back and letting them run towards you as you shoot them, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
What was I saying? Can't remember. But yeah, I think that it's just a shame that in each combat area, they're just not very interesting, and there's no like, when you're playing the game, you don't want to think, oh, I'm shooting this enemy because he's an enemy. Oh, I've got to defeat this boss because he's the boss. Like, even in Halo, like, they haven't done the boss fights well, but at least you know each boss is a character that's important, and you know their motivations and why you're killing them. You know, they don't have to be the most entertaining, but they have character.
I might just add in actually that I can, like, a lot of the sort of the small nitpicky problems, whether it be the cutscenes or the character models, I can get over if I enjoy, as you mentioned, the story and the gameplay. Like I want to say a perfect example of this is Max Payne 3. You know, I get that obviously Max Payne 3 is, the gameplay is very much catered to if you really like that sort of style of slowed down gameplay and, like, you know, getting your accuracy on point and whatnot. That's very much that's game's niche. And the story is good as well in Max Payne 3. The one thing I hate about it though is it kills replayability because there's so much unnecessary cutscenes. Like you'll walk up to a gate and there'll be a cutscene of Max walking through a gate. Like there's similar stuff. Like it kind of feels like it rips you out of control of the characters way too much. And so I'm going to acknowledge that it's definitely, the gameplay is a hit or miss thing. It could be mine, it could not be. Like I understand that some people will hate Max Payne 3 if they don't like the gameplay of it. That's fine. But the story is kind of unforgivable, to be honest, because like it doesn't take a lot for me to get invested in any story in a game, whether I don't like it or not. I can at least understand if it's good or it's well done. Like Outriders is just not there. Like there's no compelling characters. Like as you mentioned, the opening scene is a complete non-event. Like some of the characters that you meet in that cutscene, like when I met them again, I didn't care. Like I literally only had met them for like 5 seconds, and I was like meant to be like, oh, there's this person I met 5 seconds ago. How great to be reunited with them. And like that guy in the cowboy hat, whatever his name was, who gets shot at the beginning, like I don't care that he got shot. Like it has nothing to do with me. I've met him for like 5 seconds, and he's built up as this character at the beginning that's meant to be like really important to our main protagonist, because he's like, oh, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. And it's like, oh yeah, well that's great. Now he's dead. Like, so there we go. Like he is here now and you're dead. So like, who cares? Like it just seems like there's like like the first 5 minutes seem like a completely different game to like 10 minutes later. It's just like a completely different sort of thing they're trying to go for. And again, I say it's down to rush. And that's, I suppose that's maybe my way to kind of scapegoat it, but I don't want to blame any one developer or whatnot for this, because I don't think that's a progressive way of looking at games as a whole. I think it's probably down to a lot of meeting consumer demands, meeting publisher demands, meeting time restrictions, time constraints, you know. And I probably say if maybe they had another year, they probably could do something good with this. But you know, it's not up to them really whether they publish it or not. It's up to the publishers. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking like, what was the last kind of new sci-fi IP that people got on board with that had a good premise? And I thought, you know, what do you need to kind of pass off the or introduce a new IP where you want kind of sequels or a franchise to be set up? And I thought of Death Stranding, which is quite a strange game, and you know, if you didn't have the creative vision of Hideo Kojima behind that game, I don't think people would have liked it, to be honest. I think people would have found it strange and have been bemused by it. But they're willing to get on board with something from someone who they trust and like, and you know, this developers, you know, unfortunately they're up and coming. You know, they did Gears of War Judgment, which people probably view as maybe the worst Gears of War game, which is just maybe unfair because it's just a Gears spin-off, really. Yeah. I think it's hard. It's extremely hard to introduce new IPs in an extremely saturated genre. If I had kind of any closing comments, I would probably say that we've been we've been harsh on this game, probably harsher than even Control, which I enjoyed this game more than I enjoyed playing Control, if I'm honest. Just because I found Control to be a real slog, but I actually enjoyed kind of some of the gunplay in this game. So know that it's not, you know, completely irredeemable. I just think that this is a game. If you have a group of friends who you like to sit down with a game and you know, play some evenings, it's on Game Pass. Like, go get it, play it with your friends. I reckon it's, you know, a lot of fun. But you know, as for me, it's getting deleted off my console right after this podcast, just because, you know, it's fine. Like, it's a fine game. It, you know, it does its job. But what it does is perhaps not for me, who doesn't have that much time and likes to invest myself in story focused games. And as I said, I've just like plugged 55 hours into Yakuza 0, which is a game heavily with cutscenes, so that it's basically like a film where you beat someone up on the controller every now and then. But saying that, there is so much charm and so much like excellent narrative and characters in Yakuza that you can excuse that, because that's what it's going for. It is going for an epic in a sort of cinematic game form, whereas this game, obviously, it is going for that co-op grind. So yeah, if you've got a group of friends, go play it now. It's probably quite fun and will last you until the next big game comes out. It's a very good moment to play it. I think it's very lucky to have had all the interest it's gotten. But as I said, just because it is a smaller title, a smaller IP that has got this much attention, our criticism will sound unfair. But yeah, got some buddies, go play it. If you're on your own, stick to something else.
I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up, really, to be honest. I suppose people who've listened to this have really endured something, I suppose. So I appreciate you've made it this far to the end of the episode. This is now the point where I shout out a load of our social medias, so they will all be linked below. We also have a Discord server if you want to come over and interact with us over there, talk games, whatnot, games we're talking about this week, or anything else. It doesn't have to be Game Pass related. And I suppose with that being said, we will see you all maybe a couple of weeks now, because we're now sort of hunkered down, very busy for the next 2 weeks. But after that, we will be coming back with what I believe we're looking at Mass Effect 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Resident Evil 7?
Oh yes, Resident Evil 7, yes. Okay, Mass Effect will be after that. Okay, you've gotten a sneak peek into the next 2 episodes, so lucky if you... Yeah, that's the prize you get for making it to the end of the podcast. So yes, we'll see you all for then. Also, I will point out that it will be very enjoyable to hear me talk about Resident Evil 7, because I'll probably get the shit scared out of me on multiple occasions.
Oh, please record yourself. I need a jump scare reel.
Maybe, if we're lucky. With that being said, thank you all for watching, and we will see you all next time.